So modernism was a belief system that placed an emphasis on science as objective truth. Science is the only truth there is. If science cannot prove it, then it can't be true. This started in the early 1900s and following. This is where modernism became the dominant view of truth. And so with the advancement of various scientific technologies, with the invention of the automobile and the airplane and making air flight possible, and with, of course, the development of spacecraft and so forth, this gave the idea that science was basically what has advanced humanity, that science is what has made humans capable of traveling long distances through the air and in aircraft, and then, of course, the automobile invented as well. Well, this gave the view that science was supreme. And science explained everything to be true. If something isn't scientific, well, then it can't be true. And so this is known as modernism, the modernistic view. This is the same thing that affected theology, and it's affected the church. And Charles Spurgeon, near the end of his life, had warned that the spirit of modernism had entered the church. Now, that doesn't mean that Spurgeon and Christians were against science, but when he spoke about modernism, he was talking about a view that basically said, if science cannot prove certain things, they can't be true. Well, since science can't prove that a dead person can rise from the dead, well, then the resurrection of Jesus most likely didn't happen. And the Bible talks about these incredible miracles, and it talks about the Red Sea opening for the Israelites to cross on dry ground and so forth. Modernism would say, well, these things are not scientifically true because we know from nature that things just, the laws of nature just don't change like that. And so they would say that the Bible is simply a story of legends and fairy tales and so forth. And modernism became, for the most part, atheistic. And so the idea here in modernism is that if something is not scientifically proven, it is false. And therefore, supernaturalism is considered a mythical belief. Everything that is outside the scientific method is therefore mythical, legendary, not true. And so they would have a dim view of the ancient people, and they would refer to themselves as modern man. Us moderns knew better than the ancient Romans or the ancient Babylonians and the ancient Egyptians and so forth. When, as a matter of fact, we know that these ancient people were very advanced, very, very intelligent, and I think that we have become quite arrogant in our judgment of these ancient people. And so the supernatural world, the idea that Jesus was born of a virgin mother would be considered something mythical, or the raising of Jesus from the dead would be considered mythical, or they try to say it can be explained away by natural means. And then this gave birth to what's called scientism. And scientism is a philosophical school that basically says science answers to everything. Now, of course, the problem with this view was that eventually it started to collapse. And that is because science cannot explain everything. So where did this whole idea of modernism come from? Well, I'll say a little bit about the event that happened in 1789 in France called the Enlightenment. And with the Enlightenment, we had the idea that eventually led to the French Revolution of 1789. The idea arose in France that what we needed was reason. What man needed to aid him in his understanding of his world, and that means political and social and religious, was reason. And if you look at this time period of the 1700s, you'll notice something is happening here, and that is the 1700s is a time period which is responding to something that happened in Western Europe in the 1600s and 1500s. Now, if we pay attention to the time frame, we will recognize that what happened in Western Europe in the 1500s and 1600s was the advancement of the Reformation. The advancement of the Reformation. 1517, the Protestant Reformation with Martin Luther in Germany. And then, of course, as it moved forward in Geneva with John Calvin, and then John Knox in Scotland, Zwingli in Switzerland, and moving forward with the English Reformation under Henry VIII, and then John Wesley, and so forth. The Enlightenment was a reaction to the Reformation. The Reformation emphasized revelation. The Enlightenment emphasized reason. That's why it's been called the Age of Reason. And this was the birth of humanism. This is what gave birth to this view called humanism. And this view of humanism maintains that man is autonomous. So now we're back to Genesis 3. Man's autonomy. He is a law unto himself. And so with the birth of humanism, what did they say about human beings? Well, they said that man is the summit of everything, that man is the measure of all things. Man is at the top, not God. And so here we see the dethronement of God and the enthronement of man. Now, this is important because with the whole social justice movement, it's important to understand that, again, its roots are Marxist. And Marx would agree with what has just been said here. Marx would have agreed with the creeds of the Enlightenment. He would agree that man is the summit of everything, that it's not God, it's man who defines everything. It's man who defines himself. And that's exactly the ideology of Marxism. And that's the ideology in social justice. They don't go to God's law. They don't look at God's word. In fact, many of them were burning the Bible in the United States, in Portland, Oregon, just outside the courthouse. They were burning the Bible, and now they're beginning to destroy churches as well and disrupt worship services in the United States. But that's what happens when man becomes a law to himself and man defines what is right or wrong. Well, what do you end up with is totalitarianism. Because you see, the moment you remove God out of the picture, there is nothing above you. There's nothing beneath you. There's nothing above you. And so if there is no God in heaven who is watching and keeping us accountable, then you need to understand that this is where totalitarianism comes in. What is totalitarianism? Man takes over everything. Everything is defined by man. It's total. It's a totalitarian rule. Man is the center of all things. He is central. It's not us. It's not the earth. It's not the church. It's not Christianity. It's not God. It's man is the center of all things. And there is no knowledge outside of man. In other words, knowledge does not exist outside of humans. It is man who is the thinking. This is where we get the word Homo sapien in Latin. Homo sapien means the thinking man. Homo sapien, the thinking man. And so there's no knowledge outside of man. True knowledge is only to be found in man. And so the idea here is that human reason is sufficient for knowledge. Human reason is sufficient for knowledge. And this is where we are today. Now, this is not the view that social justice warriors hold today, or the movement holds today, is that man is the summit of everything. But man is the summit of everything in terms of group identity. This must not be missed. Everything is about group identity. And what they would argue is they would reject the idea that human reason is sufficient for knowledge. Why? Because they believe that the whole concept of reason and logic is a patriarchal, Western, oppressive idea. And that is why you'll find people today on social media from this type of movement, from the left, actually saying that 2 and 2 does not equal 4, that 2 and 2 equals 5, and that the whole concept of mathematics, they would say, is a Western European construct. That is to say, it is part of the patriarchy. It is part of white privilege. And therefore, mathematics now is being questioned and undermined. And this is the delusion that we are sinking into.